What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I'm seeing a lot of negative reaction to these recent fight announcements that Dana White just did because he did a live stream. The video quality was terrible. It looked like he was on an airplane, like people were walking around behind him and shit. You know, the camera's like looking up at him all awkwardly. And he just had no energy. His enthusiasm was non-existent. These are big fights. These are like multiple super fights. You got JDM versus Islam. You got Valentina versus Zhang Weili. Like, these are big end-of-the-year fights, and the dude just couldn't care less. And he announced at the very start that he had other stuff to do, and he just wanted to rush through this. And he just, like, he's hurting enthusiasm for these fights. Like, you might as well have just, like, posted it on, like, their, like, Facebook page or Twitter page or something, and I haven't done a video and just announced, like, hey, these fights are happening. Like, that almost would have, you know, helped enthusiasm better than that video of him actually announcing them. And people are getting on Dana White's case. The comment section for that stream was, you know, overwhelmingly negative. People are doing all these reaction videos where they're criticizing him, and the comment section in those videos are overwhelmingly negative. And people are realizing, and they have been realizing for a while, that Dana White is increasingly checked out, because this isn't a one-off incident. This has been building over the years. Dana White is just bringing less and less energy. He's less and less dialed in. And he's just not promoting the UFC or the sport of MMA the way he used to. And part of that's because he's kind of dividing himself, because now he's promoting Power Slap, he's getting into boxing, so he's kind of spreading himself thin. I think in the business side of things, he's less involved as the UFC president than he used to be, so I think he's feeling detached probably himself. But people are, you know, increasingly calling for Dana White to no longer be the UFC president, to no longer be the face and mouth of the company, the main promoter of the company. And I'm totally fine with that, because I agree with all of these criticisms, and I don't like Dana White, never have, so I'm fine with him getting the fuck out of there. But I think people are missing the bigger picture here, though, because this isn't the problem. This is just indicative of the bigger problem, because this is a problem that has been, you know, plaguing the UFC since its inception. And it's been a problem with the UFC even back when Dana White was a lot more enthusiastic, when he was a much better promoter, when he got you more hype for the fights. This was still a problem for the UFC. And that problem is, the UFC is fucking boring and their presentation sucks. Okay? And I'm not really talking about the fights, I'm talking about all the stuff outside of the fights. So, like, for example, what happens at the start of a UFC event? Like, when the event starts, when it's Saturday afternoon and the early prelims start, what happens? I think a lot of us don't even know, because a lot of us just skip the early prelims anyways. But even if you don't, you click on, and if you're not, as long as you're not watching it live, you just fast forward through the shit to get to the first fight, right? Now, compare that to Pride FC back in the day. Pride FC, especially for their big events, they would have this grandiose opening ceremony where, you know, it would get dark and there would be the guy playing the giant drum, and there would be the announcer lady, like, getting everyone hyped. The Pride FC theme would start, and there would be this giant screen, and there would be this giant catwalk, and they would one by one announce all the fighters who were going to fight, and they would come out, they would kind of stand before the crowd and bow, and they would go get in this line, and there'd be this huge lineup of these ass-kicking fighters. You know, you'd have Fedor and Overeem and Dan Henderson and all these guys just lined up. And it was cool, and there was fireworks, and there was lights flashing, and there was spectacle. And after you won a fight in Pride FC, like when the fight was ended, you get a knockout, whatever, the victory theme would play loud in the arena, and confetti would come down, like stuff, cool shit like that would happen. And it added a spectacle beyond the fight itself. Like, the UFC doesn't do anything like that. In fact, the UFC, even just the fighters walking out to the cage is fucking boring, because what happens? They just come out of the tunnel, because Dana White thinks it's cool for a fighter to, like, come out of a tunnel like that. You know, you look at other promotions, they've got a big stage, they've got a big, like, catwalk, they've got a big screen where, you know, there'll be some video package for the fighter, and then they announce that guy, he walks on the catwalk, elevated above the crowd, and it adds some spectacle. You even see stuff like that in boxing with, like, you know, they'll do video packages like that, and they'll do the thing where, like, the champion will come out, and his train of you know, his teammates and crew and stuff will be, like, holding his belts up above him like they're heralds, and he's like a knight of old or something. You know, that shit is cool. One Championship does something like that, where there'll be a title fight, And they do the ceremony where they bring out this briefcase that has the belt in it, and they open the briefcase and set it on the table, and they display the belt, so that's kind of like present while the fight is happening, and it's kind of drawing attention to the fact that like this is what's on the line, the winner's getting this, and it's cool. And speaking of the belt, like the UFC belts, both the old ones and the current ones, look like shit. The belts look lame. Compare the UFC belts to belts from virtually any other promotion, and even other sports. Like compare the UFC belts to like the K1 belts and stuff like that in kickboxing. The belts look lame in the UFC. Again, just taking away from any aesthetic, like epicness that we could be associating with these fights. And like even the fighter apparel, like because of the Reebok deal, the Venom deal and stuff, the UFC not only took away the fighters' ability to make money from the sponsors and have sponsors on their shorts, but they restrict what kind of shorts they can wear. And yeah, sometimes they'll make exceptions and they'll let Dustin Poirier wear custom shorts and stuff like that. But broadly speaking, they make everyone wear the same shit, the same types of trunks that look the same, and they're boring. Like, that's something, if you watch other promotions, or just even the UFC back in the day when they were allowed to, like, they wear different kinds of trunks, and it adds some flavor, and it helps distinguish the fighters a little bit more. It gives them a little more character. You know, there's a reason why, like, Sakuraba's orange trunks are iconic. There's a reason why the checkered Croatian flag trunks that Cro Cop wore are iconic. Like, it just adds some fun, some spice, some flavor. And we just don't have that in the UFC. The UFC just does nothing like that. And on top of that, you know, the cage is just like unaesthetic compared to the ring. And that's not exclusively a UFC problem, even one that sometimes they do events in cages, sometimes in rings, but they primarily do it in a round cage. But like the cage hurts the spectacle from like a viewership point of view, especially if you're there in person. It's harder to see what's happening. And it's just like less pretty. Like I'd much rather see like that kind of radiant white ring that like Pride and Ryzen use than see the fucking dismal cage that the UFC uses. And like, you know, even just minor stuff that we don't even think about anymore, because some of this is just the times changing, but we see they don't have to change because you have contemporary examples like Ryzen, but fight posters. Just look at the UFC's fight posters and then look at Ryzen's fight posters. It's not even a fucking competition. Okay? And so you put all this together, and then you add the fact that the UFC, because it's based in America, it's a Las Vegas-based company, it's selling to an American audience. The lion's share of the events happen in Vegas and in the US. Like, it's fought under the unified American MMA rules, which are fucking boring. You're not allowed to knee or kick or stomp on the heads of grounded opponents. You can go watch one. You can go watch Ryzen, where they still have the cool rules where you can knee and kick in soccer and stomp the heads of downed opponents, and it makes the fights more exciting. So even there, like, and I'm not saying the UFC doesn't have exciting fights and exciting fighters, and that they don't have the current crop of best fighters. The overwhelming majority of the best fighters in the world are in the UFC right now. It's not like it was back in the day where they were divided amongst the UFC and Pride and Strikeforce and whatnot. They're concentrated in the UFC now. But the rule set is more boring. And the judging criteria is more boring. Because judging it round by round instead of as a whole also kind of encourages boring tactics like wall installing in wrestling. Because you enter situations where it's like, yeah, but if I can hold you against the fence for 3 minutes of 3 of the rounds, I win. Whereas if the fight is judged as a whole, that can happen to you, but if you rock the guy really bad once, you're still going to win the fight. So that encourages more action. So, and some of that, I don't expect to change. Like, I don't expect the UFC to suddenly just like do all their events in Eastern Europe and Japan so they can have cooler rules or something, or to get rid of the cage. But the UFC could at least try to promote. It could at least try to make it fun. It could at least add some spectacle. It doesn't have to be completely dry and barren and fucking lame, and Dana White is not the core problem there. Dana White, the UFC could replace Dana White with someone more exciting. Like I saw Lucas Tracy saying, and he wasn't talking about firing Dana White and replacing him, but he was saying 4 fight announcements, like have Michael Bisping do it, have Daniel Cormier do it. And yeah, those guys would make it a lot more exciting. I could see them bringing a lot more energy. But even if they just fire Dana White and replace him with some other businessman or some other promoter, whatever, like someone who would do the job better and would be a more exciting mouthpiece for the company, all these other problems would still be there. The UFC would still have this just lame, lifeless, bland aesthetic, and would still put no fucking work into making any of the presentation worth a damn. And it would still just be dull compared to the other competing promotions, especially the Asian ones like ONE and Rizin, and the ones of the past like Pride FC. So I think people need to kind of slowly, hopefully, get more attuned to that fact, and maybe give a little more love to these other promotions. Because if you want some actual excitement, if you want excitement beyond just seeing the title fight and seeing whether Islam or JDM is the welterweight champ, if you want anything beyond the fight itself, the UFC ain't going to give it to you. You got to look somewhere else.